Gallery view. Let's get everybody there.
What other equipment do you use?
What other equipment does me or
I'm sure Fraser's system is much nicer than mine.
Yeah, I got all kinds of good stuff. All kinds of toys.
I've been hacking mine together out of
really
quarantine
nice,
supplies.
Microphone now. Microphone's been the worst part. Like, you want to get a microphone. Like, good audio is 95%
so much
of the game.
Yeah, I've been using my Blue Snowball on a separate tripod and then recording separately and syncing them.
Yeah.
And it still isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Because I shoot the videos on my phone because iPhone with 4K video is plenty good enough for what we're doing, but the audio is terrible.
Yeah, so we're live, by the way, just in case everybody's wondering. So if you can, like, we've got I don't have it handy.
You have the Zoom thing.
Yeah, I have the Zoom, and so I have my Zoom. And then but its microphone isn't great. And then I have I'll grab it. I'll show you.
Yeah, it's a deep world of equipment, and then I have these umbrellas too. You can see the one I have on for the show in my office right now. It's a deep world. Oh, so you don't use like a lapel?
It's about a $1,500 Sennheiser microphone. And obviously that's that's a lot of money. But and then the trick is to just get this as close to your face as humanly possible. So when I'm shooting a video and if I'm, chest up, the microphone, like literally I will be making sure the microphone is just out of the camera frame, but it's like maybe this far away from my face.
Now, how directional is that thing?
It's very directional. Like, it's way happier to be pointing directly at my face. And so then I'll have it just below my camera and it works great. Or, just off to the side. And then if I'm just recording audio separately, because it's the same microphone, I'll just record, like I'll sit somewhere quiet. I'll make sure that everything is nice and grounded. And I'll just talk into the microphone about this far away. So when I record the guide to space or whatever.
And what do you edit in?
I edited Chad.
Well, what does Chad edit in?
I think Chad does Premiere. He's editing in Premiere. Yeah. And so now what we do is we record the audio. I record an intro to the show separately, and then I use and then I record the actual audio of the episode just without video.
So once the show starts, you're not on.
That's right. Yeah, and so we just do the whole thing with full screen graphics and stuff, and that we just found that it makes a little more work for Chad, but it makes for.
I'm lazy because you need so many graphics when you do it like that.
Yeah, exactly. But he's got
that.
Yeah, he's got that just dialed in at this point. So he's able to just do he's got a huge library of graphics and he just quickly zip, zip, zip and is able to add all that stuff into it. So, okay, great. We've hit the 5-minute mark. Scott Bragdon says Chad is the answer to most problems. That is exactly right.
I want a Chad.
Yeah. You don't think about it. You just chat it. All right. And if people are wondering who Chad is, I've done an episode of my show with, interviewing Chad for an hour. So
I've met Chad.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Dude.
I am going to put you all back in your boxes.
No.
All right. No, there's me. Well, we'll wish you a happy birthday in the show. Okay. All right. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Weekly Space Hangout for Wednesday, May 6th, 2020. I'm Fraser Kane, publisher of Universe Today. This week, we're going to be talking about newly processed pictures of Europa. NASA chooses 3 companies for its Artemis lander. Simon 2 makes its debut on the International Space Station. Starship SN4 does not explode, and more. Joining me this week on my screen right now, I've got Beth Johnson. Beth, welcome back.
Hello. Thank you. Good to be here.
Happy birthday, Morgan Renberg.
Well, thank you, Fraser. It's good to be back. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think last time you were here, we congratulated you on your recent marriage, or maybe not. Maybe that was done off.
Impending, I think. Yeah, it was
Your,
even before that. I was on like pre-COVID.
yeah, you've definitely got your
Just
COVID
oh
hairstyle
yeah,
going
no,
on.
it's barbers are open here now, but I'm not going out my door.
And of course, from the wee hours of the morning, we've got Nika Klimovich. Nika.
Hello. Hi, space fans.
All right, so before we get on to our special guest, and boy, it's going to be a good one, so stay tuned. I just want to give a huge thank you, as always, to our good friends, our partners at the Weekly Space Hangout crew. They are the executive producers. They are the people who organize the show every week, make sure that it happens. They choose the guests. We just show up and do our job. So if you want to be a part of this amazing community, go to wshcrew.space, and they will help you become an executive producer right away. And then you too will be able to reach out and talk to all the astronauts and astronomers that you want to bring them onto the show. And then I will interview them for you. So wshcrew.space. All right, let's get into our special guest this week. We've got Pascal Lee from many places. Pascal, welcome to the Weekly Space Hangout.
It's great to be here, Fraser. Good to see you.
So who are you? What do you do?
I'm a planetary scientist. I work with two nonprofits, the Mars Institute and the SETI Institute, and I'm based at NASA Ames in California.
Not currently on the set of 2001.
No, that's just my backdrop.
So I think, what you are best known for, where you've sort of worked your way into my consciousness, and actually, I have been a fan of your work for literally almost 2 decades at this point. I think pretty much as soon as I started reporting on space news, you had already been making a lot of headway on this topic, and that is helping get humans to Mars. You are one of the most kind of prolific human Mars senders that I am aware of. So can you tell me a bit about the work that you're doing to try to get humans to set foot on the red planet?
Yeah, well, I really think that it is the challenge of our time. We, of course, are on a course to go back to the moon now, and it's a good thing. And in fact, the way we're returning to the moon is really good in the sense that it's Moon to Mars is really the name of the program. And so I do believe that it's as far as government agencies are concerned, like NASA, it is the right way to get us to Mars as soon as possible in practice. I think that what I'm often associated with is somehow a desire to colonize Mars, and that's really not it. I'm actually not a proponent of Mars colonization. I'm very much on board the idea of exploring Mars with humans. I think that our goal there should be to set up an international research base at the surface of Mars, much like an ISS in terms of its sort of political model, but a research base on Mars that would be crewed permanently and internationally, a bit like an international Antarctic or Arctic station. And the personal reason why I am so interested in Mars and wanting to see this is because Mars is really an exciting place scientifically. There's a real chance for us to find life on Mars. Although to be more specific, what I'm personally and many others who are in science interested in is to find we're interested in finding a first example of an alien form of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I've often said that even if curiosity or perseverance is about to go there, returns an undisputable picture of fossil, bedded fossil rocks to us, we still will not be able to tell whether or not we would have found alien life.
Right.
And by alien life, we mean that life that would have had its own origin on Mars, independent of life on Earth. We now know that the Earth and Mars and planets in general are not isolated systems. We have meteorites that have come from Mars, from asteroids and comets hitting Mars. Conversely, there must be Earth rocks at the surface of Mars today, lobbed out of the Earth by giant impacts on our planet. And so it's completely conceivable that life could have started on one of the two planets and then just seeded the other. It's just exported life. It's not a separate origin of life. And so finding that form of life is, of course, interesting on the other world. But it doesn't really tell you necessarily that life is a common thing in the universe.
Right.
Or that you are really answering the question you want. So to find life on Mars that you could establish is alien, you have to find it alive. Because to establish it that it's alien, you have to do genetics on it. You have to be able to essentially, even if it doesn't use DNA, you will have to do genetics on it to see if it plots onto the tree of life on Earth or not. You, me, Morgan, Beth, whether you like it or not, as you know, we're all part of the same tree of life. My dog, Apollo,
mushrooms. Yeah, we're all related.
We are all part of the same tree of life. And what that means is that we share at least some fraction of our DNA, if you will. I mean, technically it's defined by RNA, but that we share that in common. And what we're looking for is something that would just not plot onto the tree of life of Earth.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to do genetics. To do genetics, you have to find it alive. To find it alive, the only way to do that these days, we think, is to go underground. You have to be out of the radiation zone at the surface. You have to go underneath the surface. So you either drill or you go into natural holes in the subsurface, like caves, which we now know exist on Mars.
And I mean, that prospect for finding life would be wonderful. And of course, it's like the most fundamental question that human beings have almost ever asked scientifically is, are we alone in the universe? But that's just one thing. I mean, there are geologic questions. There are questions about just the shared formation of the Earth versus the Mars. How did Mars lose its magnetic field? I mean, there's just so many questions, many of which would be enhanced by having human beings there with their, meat manipulators being able to actually pick up rocks and examine them. And I think there are certain limits. So, that there's always that case, can robots or humans explore Mars better? Obviously we know we can get robots there. So make the case, and I'm sure you've done this 1,000 times, make the case why you think humans belong scientifically on Mars.
Yeah. So what I just gave you was my personal driver to see people on Mars, to do scientific research. But if you look back at the history of exploration, no government-sponsored expensive expeditions of the past has ever been to satisfy scientific curiosity. We just don't do that. James Cook was not in the South Pacific because the British Navy was interested in botany. President Kennedy did not send Americans to the moon because somehow in the mid-60s we were interested in the origin of the Earth moon system. The primary reason we went there was to serve the national interest. It was a strategic reason for us to do this. James Cook went to the South Pacific because the French were also there. We went to the moon with President Kennedy because the Soviet Union and communism were a threat to our way of life. At least that was the perception at the time. So the reason why I think we haven't so far sent people to Mars is because not enough people have been convinced yet that it would serve our national interest in a strategic way. And I'd like to make the case here quickly that it would. Mm-hmm. There are three benefits that have come from the Apollo program, and only two are most commonly recognized, not the third one. The first benefit is that, okay, we beat communism and socialism, and we are better off this way with our way of life now. The second thing, and that was an immediate benefit.
Yeah, but that was 50 years ago. I mean, what have they done for us lately?
But that was the immediate benefit indeed, and that was 50 years ago. The second benefit was that, of course, we've learned a lot about the Earth moon system. We've made a giant leap science-wise. We now understand a lot more how planets form, what impact craters are. Before we sent people to the moon, we thought craters on the moon might be volcanoes. So we now know that there are impact craters. And this has been the beginning of a revolution in our understanding of the solar system and of our place in the universe. But that's the science benefit, and that's a second major benefit. But the third benefit that's, I think, the most profound in the sense that it still has an impact today is that the Apollo program stimulated STEM education like nothing had ever done in this nation. There's this plot from the NSF that I often show that shows you that during the years of the Apollo program, really specifically the years of the Apollo program, when we were going to the moon, there was a doubling in the number of graduates in US universities in all STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, math, biology, earth sciences. And this generation that was bred and raised and inspired by Apollo is what gave us our technological and economic leadership still today. It's no coincidence that the techies are all into their own space programs. Elon has SpaceX, Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin, but many others actually have space dreams that are coming true because of their inspiration from the Apollo years.
I mean, both of them actually chart, both Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk chart their inspiration for space flight partly to Robert Zubrin and the Case for Mars and everything that the Mars Society was doing, and just this idea of sending humans to Mars for a scientific mission, that there's something really magical about the scale and audacity of that goal that a lot of people can get behind. It was, it's the same kinds of ideas that Carl Sagan inspired us with.
Yeah. I don't actually think that it's specifically to Bob Zubrin. I mean, Elon, I know, was interested in Mars well before the Bob Zubrin era. And Jeff Bezos himself is not specifically interested in Mars. He's more interested in space in general.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think he's more of a Gerald O'Neill fan, but still, just that idea, right? That giant goal is the kind of thing that you can get behind.
Yes. And so for me, for the taxpayer who's not particularly interested in either the moon or Mars, what I usually say is this: first of all, the money is not spent in space.
Yeah,
it is spent here on Earth in advanced technologies, in universities, in factories, in new capabilities for each nation that undertakes this type of project. But the other thing is that we have to refresh our STEM force. And going to Mars is incredibly powerful. If you go to schools, which I often do, kids are interested in two things: space and dinosaurs. And when it comes to space, it's Mars.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mars, NASA has an amazing and exciting Mars program that continues. And in fact, we're launching Perseverance this year, so that's very exciting.
Yeah.
But the point is, when I talk about humans going to Mars, it really lights up a fire that I don't quite see when we talk about returning just to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that's not to say that we should just follow what kids want. We are needing to go back to the moon because there's an imperative to be at that place that's so close to the Earth and learn how to go to Mars. But Mars is really an exciting destination for so many reasons. And so, but the main one for the taxpayer is that it would be an incredible investment into the STEM force of this nation. We have an Air Force to protect us from air attacks. We have a Navy protect us from naval attacks. We have an Army. A STEM force is what will build our strength as an economic.
That's an interesting term. I've never heard anybody use that term before, of this idea of a STEM force. That I love it. Just this idea of a scientific defense against the kinds of problems, the kinds of threats that we face in the future. And here we are, right in the middle of one of them, right?
That's what the United States had at the end of World War II. It had been building up itself, of course, over many years. But after each major war, a lot of immigrants also came to the United States and contributed to building an incredible powerhouse, a STEM force, which of course helped us get to the moon, and So that's my point. My point is that it's not just throwing money out the door or out the window into space. In fact, it's not that at all. But beyond that, it's a profound and inspiring investment in our future. And which is why when I am asked, why, how much would a mission to Mars cost? I actually say unabashedly that it would cost about $1 trillion. And, that has the effect of sometimes making people recoil, but no $1 trillion would be better spent, other than, of course, saving ourselves in pandemics, but would be better spent than in, getting us farther and deeper into space.
Yeah,
Because
and
of
that
all the
amount has
benefits.
been spent in various wars and recent military activities, and so of course you imagine the comparison. I've got a couple of questions just on. You mentioned early on that you're a fan of sending humans to Mars for the exploration side of things, the scientific, and that idea. I'm sort of imagining McMurdo Station, but on Mars. That astronauts go, they come from different nations, they spend time on Mars, they do experiments, both in learning to survive on Mars, but also understanding more about Mars, searching for life, etc. But there's a lot of people, I think, that's not enough, that they see Mars as the place, humanity's future home. Elon Musk for one of them. So do you draw a line? Do you think that it never, like, you're not a fan of people living on Mars, that it should always remain a pristine wilderness like Antarctica?
Antarctica is not a pristine wilderness because we necessarily want to keep it that way. I mean, of course, we have an Antarctic treaty that's protecting the place, against first order, ruthless exploitation. But the truth is, Antarctica is not populated because it's such an hostile environment. After decades and decades of going to Antarctica, all we end up doing, and meanwhile, there were efforts like Chile and Argentina actually had families settle in Antarctica back in the 70s to try to establish, an ownership.
That's crazy. I had no idea. That's amazing.
And of course, eventually they were too far from help and had to be repatriated. But so now there are no communities per se that are literally living in Antarctica. There are stations that are occupied sometimes 2 years at a time. But people go back and forth. And not only that, but we're not even growing a lot of the stuff, by somehow terraforming Antarctica, or in corners of it. We just bring what we need, and we use mainly the water that we can melt from ice there, or actually we pump seawater at McMurdo. So my point about this is that, but meanwhile, in addition to being accessible to scientists, there is tourism in Antarctica. People do go there, spend some time, visit the place. And this tourism is very important because it builds awareness of the beauty of Antarctica, of the need to protect it. And I tend to have that vision for Mars, at least for a very long time, that if we had an Antarctic research station there, it would be manned and crewed for science above all. But we could also envision with Elon's Starship, groups of people going there to spend some time on Mars to visit. But the whole notion of raising a family there and settling on a world where you have to understand there's a romance to the Martian landscape that I think has been driving a lot of this Wild West call to go to Mars. But the truth is, it's a completely lethal and horrible place when it comes to living there. I'm interested in Mars because it's such an extreme environment, and it's it might still have life, and you want to explore the place. But I wouldn't want my family to be raised there, and I don't see the point of that.
Yeah,
you have to understand that to survive on Mars, you are essentially in perpetual life support. I sometimes call that the collective ICU.
Yeah.
If you want to have a colony on Mars, you're basically putting them in an intensive care unit.
Yeah, and everyone is surviving 100% on the technology. The moment any of your technology fails in any way, shape, or form, it's over.
You can have backups. You can have ways to mitigate this. But the amount of effort you would put into this for a world that is, in the end, not really transformable quickly. The dreams of terraforming would take centuries to really terraform Mars in a significant way. And we don't build cathedrals over centuries anymore. We just don't.
So, Pascal, place your bets. When do we see the first footsteps back on Mars? What timeline, what future timeline excites you the most right now?
1 decade at a time. Right now, the decade of the 20s, we're back on the moon.
Yeah.
Decade of the 30s, we're going to Mars, but mainly to Mars orbit. I think we have to be doing some round trips to Mars without worrying about landing. First of all, it will allow us to face the cost of going to Mars. $1 trillion I talked about is over 25 years, which means that the global budget of space programs around the world would have to be at 40 billion a year. 40 billion times 25 gets you to 1 trillion over 25 years. And at the end of the 25 years, you have an international base on Mars that you can walk into. So by the mid 2030s, we would do round trips to Mars, to Mars orbit. We could explore the moons of Mars, which are very interesting. And by the early 40s, hopefully.
So you're thinking 40s, 40.
This is how I envision NASA could plausibly make the case that it will be there in the 2040s. You have the wild card, which is Elon.
Yep.
Which, of course, he's following his own star, and I'm glad he can, and he should. So he might actually make it there sooner. But Elon has been focused mostly on the transportation, the means to get there.
Right.
Not, at least not publicly, a lot on what you do once you get there.
Right.
And therein lies the sort of the cost is and the complexity, which is to keep people alive there.
Yeah. And yeah, the thousands of little details. Where do you go to the bathroom? How do you get your food? How do you provide your power, et cetera, et cetera?
I do see in this century your regular Earth tourist being able to hop on a flight on a Starship, going to Mars, spending a time at a sort of a hotel / base. It's like the hotels that astronomers occupy at observatory when they go to Chile, for example, and they spend a few months up there observing. There's a hotel there that's in an extreme environment, helping them stay alive. And that's the type of setup that I would see on Mars, where people could go visit, spend some time, do a few EVAs, do some flights over canyons, bring back incredible memories. But maybe some people long for having a new frontier to sort of conquer and civilize. When I think that's not Mars. Well, at least that's not what Mars is to me. It's an amazing place to explore scientifically, and I would bet that we might make more headway in interstellar travel and begin to have the ability to get ourselves or our avatars or our descendants to habitable exoplanets before we're in a position to really colonize Mars with millions.
Yeah, and the thing that I always say is that in the future, when our technology gets so overwhelming, then doing that becomes relatively easy. Like if we get to a point where we have so much infrastructure in space, so much capability, then it's a no-brainer. Like absolutely, we can go live on Mars, we can live on Europa, we can do whatever we want, right? Because we've been at this space exploration thing for 300 years, and we've got that technology and that ability. Absolutely fascinating. I don't want to use up any more of your time. If people want to follow the work that you're doing, where should they go?
The website of the Haughton-Mars Project, which is our work in the Arctic to get ready for Mars exploration, is marsonearth.org. marsonearth.org.
marsonearth.org.
If you are interested enough to want to contribute to our research, to help us keep working on getting humans to Mars for scientific exploration, donate please to the SETI Institute. The SETI Institute is my home institution for this, and it's an amazing place, and they welcome donations.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm sure Beth will follow up on that. Pascal, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And if anyone's going to help us get to Mars, it's going to be you. So when you do feel like a timeline is starting to solidify and you think when that first person is going to walk on Mars, please let us know.
I'll let everybody know.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody.
All right, let's move on to the news portion of the show. All right, Morgan, let's talk about Artemis.
Oh, where to begin? Because really, this is a story of SLS told through the lens of Artemis, and it's been a bad couple of weeks for SLS. But first, let's get to the Artemis news, which is last week NASA awarded contracts to 3 proposals to build and deliver the landing elements for the Artemis program to get to the moon. So this is basically to go from the Deep Space Gateway to the surface of the moon, and then back from the surface of the moon to the Deep Space Gateway. And these are initial contracts for 10 months worth of work. Each group proposed to do a different kinds of work during that 10 months, and they each asked for pretty variable amounts of money. And so there's nothing to read in here into the amounts of money that NASA awarded in terms of who they like. Administrator Bridenstine was really clear that they basically gave companies the amount of money they asked for within reason, and so you shouldn't think more deeply than that. So the first contract went to a team that's been sort of nicknamed the national team, because this is all the sort of old space companies, but led by the newest of new space companies, Blue Origin. And so Blue Origin is working with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Draper to build sort of the most Apollo-esque of the landers, which would be this combined ascent-descent vehicle that goes down to the surface of the moon. Astronauts do their thing, then they get back in, and a second piece blows off and goes back up to the lunar gateway.
Yeah.
And this whole system would be assembled and launched on Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, which is well in development, but hasn't yet seen any tests or flights. And they got about $600 million for this study. The next group, which got about $250 million, was led by this company Dynetics, working with Sierra Nevada. And their proposal was actually to build a single integrated system that would land on the moon, then drop a bunch of empty fuel tanks, and then blast back off of the moon. And then you'd like plug some new fuel tanks into it at the Deep Space Gateway, and you could use it again and again for some number of missions. And then the third and sort of surprise winner in this contract was SpaceX, who had bid Starship, launched on Super Heavy, for $130 million for this study. SpaceX has this habit of asking for a lot less money than everybody else, and then given a lot less money than everybody else. And their proposal is basically to use Starship more or less as we all know it, as one integrated system that would launch and land and launch again from the moon, and then be refueled in space. So this is not a Starship that would be capable of landing back on Earth, because in order to save weight and stuff, they have to drop a lot of the materials and components needed for that. So they would send other Starships effectively to go refuel the lunar landing one. And that mission would be launched, of course, on Super Heavy. And I didn't mention that the Dynetics team is planning to launch on the Vulcan rocket from the ULA.
Right.
So you could sort of take 2 big things away from this. One is there was only one team that didn't get money, and that was Boeing. And NASA basically spelled out that they gave money to all the teams they thought would be reliable, and did not give money to all the teams they thought would not be reliable.
Ouch.
So that's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
If you're Boeing, and obviously they're having a bad run of it in the last 12 months in space and not in space. But I think the bigger story here is that all 3 of these missions are intending to launch using rockets other than SLS.
Yes.
In fact, all 3 of them are intending to launch on rockets that have yet to fly.
That's right. Vulcan, the
Super Heavy is barely even being developed. Vulcan is probably still a year or 2 away from test flights. And Blue Origin is kind of a black box. And so for all we know, New Glenn will roll out into the launch pad tomorrow and be ready to go.
I've seen pictures of the fairing. It's really big.
Yeah, they're pretty far along from all indications. But NASA is effectively saying these 3 unflown, in some cases undesigned rockets are more likely to be ready in 2024 than SLS is.
Oh, snap.
And there are two other pieces of SLS news that kind of piled on in the last couple of weeks. The first was this report that shows that a single engine for SLS is going to cost more than an entire Falcon Heavy launch. These are the Space Shuttle main engines.
The RS-25s.
Yeah, and they're going to cost about $150 million a piece under the NASA contract issued for, I think, to Aerojet Rocketdyne to build them. And they'll be used one time.
Yeah, they've got 16. I mean, I just got to take 1 second here and just reiterate what you're saying. These shuttles are the Ferrari engines the Ferraris of rocket engines. They are some of the most powerful, most efficient rocket engines ever made, and the whole point of them is that they were reused. They were designed for reusability.
They're the OG reusable.
Exactly,
rocket.
And so they were designed to go to space many times, and did. And so when that first SLS takes off in 2021, 2022, who knows when it goes, it's going to take 4 of those beautiful engines and smash them into the ocean. And then they're going to take 4 more and smash those into the ocean. And then they're going to run out of tried and true space shuttle engines. And so they're just going to order a bunch more at $150 million a pop off of Aerojet Rocketdyne.
And that's like the discount price.
Yeah,
but
bulk
that price is 3 times higher than NASA was paying for those engines in the space shuttle era.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't suggest that they're going to get the cost down on SLS to the point in which they're actually going to be able to launch it a meaningful number of times. But I think what was actually the most brutal news for SLS came today when NASA disclosed that they have designed the Lunar Gateway to be launched as a combined piece, rather than being assembled in space. And that the design constraint was that it had to be launchable on the Falcon Heavy. And this is a piece that is, in law, NASA is required to fly on SLS. In fact, many of these pieces, NASA is effectively required to fly on SLS. But at every turn in the last year, they have guided companies and set design requirements to ensure that components can fly on things other than SLS. And you get the sense that they're just waiting for somebody to take that restriction off, and then they're going to run as far away from it as possible.
Right.
And that doesn't seem crazy. We got this news that engineers at NASA are afraid that the SLS has leaking in its fuel core, but its main fuel tanks hasn't even flown yet, and they think that it has serious design issues.
And so at this point, like, it's becoming more and more clear that the whole gateway could very well get launched on Falcon Heavy, that this is now potentially they need to design with that possibility as well, which essentially puts more competition back into the system. So one kind of terrifying possibility is that just SLS continues to get developed and they continue to do the work, but at the same time they keep launching all of this stuff on Falcon Heavies and New Glens and Vulcan rockets, and eventually someone, I don't know, finally dismantles the SLS, and that's the last we see of it, right? Like,
yeah, can they really do it? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nika.
That's a great question.
I was just wondering, like, can they really cancel the program? Is it even possible?
I think what they need is it to be obvious that there are a lot of things that aren't required for SLS, like things that there aren't a lot of things depending on SLS, and that it's much obviously fiscally cheaper to launch on something else. And number 2, the need that there are other cheaper options is already true. Like, we know already Falcon Heavy is cheaper. We don't really have any sense of what it's going to cost for Super Heavy or for New Glenn, but they're surely going to be less than $1 billion, probably hundreds of millions. Mm-hmm. So that part is basically assured. But NASA's story all along has been that the reason SLS exists is because it enables things that cannot be done in any other rocket.
Nothing else can launch Europa Clipper. Nothing else can launch the propulsion module for the Lunar Gateway. Nothing can carry humans back to the moon.
Right, and that story will only hold up as long as there aren't other super heavy rockets out there, but also it can fall apart more quickly if NASA starts artificially restricting their proposals to work on other rockets. And once those two things come together, I think the pressure will grow pretty quickly to see changes. And I don't think it'll be killed off in one fell swoop. But as much money has been spent on R&D so far, an equal amount of money in the future will be spent on procurement. Buying the things for, and if they just slowly descope the number of things they're planning to use SLS for, then that's money saved, even if we've already flushed 10 billion down the drain.
Right. And so is the way this kind of, and I mean, part of the whole reason why SLS was developed in the first place was to put the space shuttle workforce to continue working on them. I mean, when you look at the number of contracts that are spread around the entire United States, various parts of the space shuttle and SLS are built in every state in the United States. That is very different politically from you writing a check to Elon Musk and SpaceX for...
Right. It's basically a jobs program. And it has... the day they decided to require the use of the space shuttle main engine for SLS was the day it was a jobs program. Because as amazing as that engine is, it was developed in the 1970s using different materials and a different level of engineering and simulation and that sort of thing, and was never going to be the right tool. Almost never in something like this is the right tool something that's already on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of what the national team led by Blue Origin is banking on, because by involving these big aerospace companies like Northrop and Lockheed, they can claim to sort of spread around the Artemis love in much the same way that SLS does, much more convincingly than say a SpaceX can. SpaceX rockets are being built in California or in Florida or in Texas. You're not seeing a lot of machinists in New Hampshire working on parts for Falcon rockets. With the blue chip team, the national team, that'll be a much easier sell. And so you could imagine a scenario in which NASA awards to the final contract to Blue Origin in this kind of swap with what was happening with SLS.
Yeah, and I mean, the Falcon Heavy is a tremendous rocket. In theory, if we can believe the stats, the New Glenn is even more powerful than the Falcon Heavy. Its reusable mode can carry as much cargo as the Falcon Heavy in expendable mode. And of course, we've all oohed and awed over the Starship, which takes the amount of mass that it can launch to orbit to ridiculous levels and brings the price way, way down, because nothing is getting thrown away on that rocket. And so really right now, we're still living in this uncertainty while we wait for all of these next generation of launchers to actually show up and actually carry heavy payloads that relate to what NASA needs. But I think NASA is kind of meeting them halfway here, right? They're saying, okay, we've seen the Falcon Heavy launch 3 times now, and everything's gone great. So tell us what you could do if we scaled.
It's very, very different than the NASA of 2015.
Yeah.
Which is, when SLS was first supposed to be launching, and NASA publicly and privately, as far as anyone could tell, was basically broaching no other alternative. SLS was the one true rocket, and there wasn't really a lot of dissent inside or outside of NASA, at least within the government.
Yeah.
And it's clear that the 5 years of schedule delays and cost overruns since then, and the coming several more years of delays and overruns, have worn that patience exceptionally thin in the wrong places in NASA. And now they're just waiting to sort of get out of this congressional cage. And NASA is full of people who just want to get the job done.
Yeah.
And SLS is clearly not the right tool for that in an increasing number of places.
Right. But
I just have sorry.
Go ahead, Nika.
I just have a very last question. So, imagine it's a very, very bad scenario, but imagine all 3 wouldn't work. They are not flying yet, don't they?
Right.
So would then it be possible then NASA says, okay, let's give a contract to, I don't know, Chinese launcher?
I would say it's effectively impossible that NASA would give a contract to China. You could maybe imagine some terrible scenario in which they were working with like Arianespace or Roscosmos or something.
Yeah,
but
or ISRO's got a big, India's got a big super heavy lift rocket coming. So
yeah, I kind of think they would make it work on Falcon Heavy. Because, especially Bridenstine is very much sort of the rah-rah, we're going to launch American astronauts to the American space station on American rockets from American soil kind of thing. Yeah. And it's hard to see him giving up that sort of drumbeat when it's almost certain that you could make it work on Falcon Heavy, even if you had to launch several times to get the stuff up there. And it's hard to see them going away from that. And Falcon Heavy is so inexpensive that 2 or 3 launches would be cheaper than one launch of any of these super heavy lift vehicles.
I don't know if you've heard, the Chinese just launched their new super heavy lift rocket yesterday. Yes. And they put 22 tons into orbit on their new Long March 5B. So they're in the same ballpark as what, say, the Falcon Heavy could do in a reusable mode. Which is, and
that's what
impressive.
It's going to take, I think, to get national attention, is for China to be seen as actually making progress. Ever since their Tiangong stations, sort of in the early part of the 2010s, they've kind of gone quiet in the human spaceflight arena. And it's really been this drama of will they, won't they, for commercial crew to the space station. But if China is suddenly seen as taking these big leaps and bounds that they haven't for a decade, it was those leaps and bounds a decade ago, I think, that arguably helped kick off commercial crew for NASA. And I think that could really get Congress to wake up and say, hey, getting it done is more important than getting it done with SLS.
Yeah.
And once that floodgate opens, all sorts of things are possible.
All right, Morgan, we got to move on, but place your bets. Does SLS fly?
Ever?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Does it fly a lot? Never.
Okay. We will wait and see how it all plays out. Beth, I choose you.
Okay. So once again, I'm bringing you a story that looks at reusing old data to find new information. So in this case, scientists at NASA JPL and at SETI Institute have taken legacy images from the Galileo spacecraft and reprocessed them using some modern techniques so that they could create new images of Jupiter's moon Europa. Of course, we're all in the planning stages for the Europa Clipper, so they want to learn more about the surface before they get there, even though they're not landing on it this time, but they want to kind of get a feel for what they're looking at. And so they took these images that were taken back in 1998. There are 2 sets. So one are some high-res images that were done in grayscale, and 2 were the lower-res images that were done in color. And Mario Valenti, who is at the SETI Institute, reprocessed these images and mapped the color over the grayscale so that you could kind of see more surface detail and produce these enhanced color images. So you can see 2 primary kind of color schemes to them. There's white, sort of white and light blue, and then there's ones that are red. And because it's enhanced color, it's not natural color. What it is the light blue, white areas are water ice, and then any area that is red has some sort of additional non-ice material in it. And I love this term. They use it, they describe Europa as chaos terrain. So the surface has been broken apart, and they have these big blocks that have been shifted around inside sort of a really like featureless matrix. So think of it as like a cement with big rocks in it. And they get twisted and turned and rotated, and then they kind of get frozen back into place. And so now they're in new positions, and the scientists are using these images to sort of backtrack the history of how the pieces have moved. So that's pretty fascinating that they're able to take these images from 98 and turn them into some science to sort of look at the history of Europa.
Yeah.
And the cool thing, so a lot of people ask me like, well, how does Europa have a liquid ocean? Basically what happens is that Jupiter is really, really big and it pulls unevenly on its moons. but its moons are also really, really big. So Ganymede and Callisto pull on Europa from the other side. So you have this constant push and pull. And since, we know Earth is not a perfect sphere, it's an oblate spheroid, it's kind of the same thing going with Europa. So it flexes and pulls in different directions and different rotations. And so that keeps the water on the inside heated up. And that also causes the surface cracks that give you the blocks that you can now rotate and shift around. So it's the same mechanic that keeps Io warm and allows that to actually have volcanoes erupt too.
These pictures of Europa are just fantastic. They really, just to see this higher resolution, to see these little cracks and fissures and the bands and ridges going across. Like, we've got to go back.
Oh, I completely agree. Europa is like, please go to Europa. Please.
Yeah. That's what SLS will be used for. Like, take us to Europa. Take us to Europa, SLS.
The Europa Clipper will be, basically, it's just going to do a bunch of flybys. Unfortunately, there isn't a plan to set anything down on Europa at this point.
Yeah. Well, they included budget for, NASA gave the Europa Clipper team some budget to consider putting a lander on the moon, but they were actually a little less enthusiastic about that idea, just because you kind of want to go do a bunch of analysis of the place, build up a bunch of scientific questions, and then build a lander that will be able to help you answer those specific questions, as opposed to trying to figure out the questions that you're going to want to answer before you know the questions. So I get it, but I would like to see something from the surface of Europa. Like, come on, how crazy would that be?
Couldn't we just drop something?
Something, just just something, right? With a camera. We know we're going to want a camera, land there. Slackbot says, all these worlds are yours except Europa. Attempt no landings there. No way. We're totally landing on Europa.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hear that quote all the time, and I'm over it.
It's honestly. Science fiction. We're landing on Europa. Awesome. I can't wait. Nika, what have you got for us?
I just want to comment on the previous one. I'm again fascinated by the scientists who just take the work that they've done before, and because of the technologies or whatever, or the brilliant ideas, they're doing even more science on top of it. It's just crazy how we are capable.
It's amazing how these older space missions are still the gifts that keep on giving. We're getting stuff out of Galileo and Cassini and even Voyager. So it just amazes me how well designed all of these things were.
Yep. Nika, what have you got for us?
I'm talking about the robots, and it's aligns with our topics today, with Pascal going to Mars and Moon, and maybe to Europa, who knows. So basically, there is this robot called Simon 2. It's kind of an AVEXA in space, they call it. It's a small robot currently assisting astronauts on ISS, and it is an updated version of Simon 1, which was on ISS in 2018. And this is, as you see it on the screen, it is a flying ball equipped with artificial intelligence. Yeah, and it's developed and constructed in Germany.
I want one.
So how does this thing work?
So basically it has this, you see the screen, and it has several fans that sucks in the air and pulls it out to navigate through the area. It has, 8 cameras, various cameras and microphones and loudspeakers, so to recognize speech, to talk, to see where it's going, to analyze various features. And this small ball is basically used to, it's designed to be an assistant for the astronauts, but it's also designed to be a friend for an astronaut.
Yeah.
That's kind of this new feature that is coming in Simon 2. So, of course, as an assistant, it helps to do the experiments, like by demonstrating or explaining the instructions. It can follow the astronauts. It can search objects on ISS autonomously. It can recognize faces of astronauts and play their favorite music. And the new feature now, it can navigate to a specific area on ISS just by using verbal command. Just
wow, that's cool.
To go to biolab that was in this video.
Yeah.
And it goes to the biolab, for example. And this brilliant another feature, which is called emotional intelligence. It is based on IBM Watson tone analyzer technique or feature.
Right.
And it makes Simon understand and analyze the emotions of the astronauts during the conversation, and see how they are feeling and react accordingly.
You appear to be suffering from space madness.
Yeah,
astronaut.
And they would say, "Oh, how are you feel? How can I help you?" And they can make even a sad face, or just to cheer you up, or make a joke. They have even Simon has a humor. So and it's incredibly important for the future mission, long duration mission like Moon, missions to Moon or Mars, because it was already proven in several research that if you have a friend, you will less stress due to the isolation and maybe some group dynamics. And also, if you are completing a task with another crew member, it's also less stressful for astronauts. So having
that's really cool.
A companion which is passionate or understands your emotions will help you for the future missions.
Yeah,
so site robots is cool.
That's really cool.
So everyone needs a friend in isolation, as we have all learned in the last few months.
Yeah. I could just imagine, like, you know, this is like the HAL. This is like, you know, you can imagine some science fiction where it all turns into a nightmare as this little floating ball is falling around the space station. You know, threatening you.
Are you okay?
So,
Are you okay?
I'm okay. Are you okay?
Yeah. Are you okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about getting to Mars. These things are going to be necessary to overcome the psychological challenges of, you know, long duration space flight. You know, those 4 people are going to get really sick of each other.
Yeah.
You know, on day 321 of their trip to Mars. But if you have these kind of anthropomorphized machines to help, I think that's the kind of research that has to happen. You know, right now they're so simple, it seems kind of silly.
Yeah.
But in the future, those kinds of things are going to be critical.
Yeah, totally.
Funny fact, Simon 1, the first version, had a personality crisis. And they had to hire, IBM had to hire or get a psychologist in their team to give Simon a personality, because for example, when somebody was asking how are you, he was getting rude, and when somebody asked his age, he was getting annoyed. So they had to give him a specific personality so that it can react.
That's funny,
and it's also very funny.
So thank you, Nika. That's awesome. So before we wrap up, we talked about Starship, and so we have some good news. Starship didn't explode, and of course, any day that Starship doesn't explode is a good day. So we got an announcement that Starship tested its Raptor engine for 4 seconds, firing one engine attached to the bottom of Starship prototype SN4.
Look how tiny it looks inside the.
I know.
Inside the rocket.
Wow.
And so they fired it for 4 seconds, and the test firing was fine. And so now we've tested a beginning stage of cryogenic fuel. We've tested, SpaceX has tested a very short test firing. Feels like things are getting like a little bit closer, that maybe we're going to see this thing, I don't know, have like a whole week where it doesn't explode. So, and eventually maybe we'll see one of these things take off and hop around, and then maybe hop up to 20 kilometers and maybe go to orbit. I'm really looking forward to the continuing progress. Or maybe it'll drop a lander on the surface of the moon. So, as part of the new NASA package. But
such optimism, Fraser.
I know. I really am optimistic. I was so crestfallen as all the different prototypes had their various catastrophic failures. So I would
This one will explode too. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, I've heard they don't really have a long plan for SN4. SN5 is going to be the one. SN5 is going to be the money, but SN4 I think is not going to last. It's not going to be around for long. So yeah, no, I'm sure it's just a matter of time before it explodes. But until then, keep going, Starship. You better fly. All right. You're on my screen, Morgan. So why don't you let us know what you're working on and what's coming up next?
Yeah, absolutely. At the museum, as we've been trying to figure out how we're going to reopen a entirely touch museum in the age of do not touch things, we've been creating a ton of content online for families educating their kids at home. So if you had a preschooler or an elementary school kid or even up through middle school, we've got all sorts of cool content at youtube.com/Fort Worth Museum.
And if people want to follow you on the internet?
You can follow me on Twitter at Morgan Renberg or morganrenberg.com. But my COVID withdrawal, I haven't been doing a lot of social media.
That's probably best. I promise It's just a place of anxiety and despair. Nika, what are you working on?
Basically, I have a new, I would say, project. I joined an organization which is called Gaia Aerospace. It's in Germany, organization for the new space. And basically the idea behind is to connect all new spacers in Germany and foster new space research. So maybe these projects that are really complicated or maybe crazy, but get some funding and get it done. So I'm currently working on in the next shows. I
think that's great, just to connect people who are working in this field together so that they can collaborate on projects.
Exactly.
Awesome. And if people want to find out more about what you're working on, where should they go?
I would post anything I will be doing on Veronica Space. It's on Twitter.
Okay, great. Beth, what are you working on?
So we launched our Facebook art group for SETI last month, and we ran our first challenge, which was the TRAPPIST-1 system. We're going to be posting some of the wonderful art that we've gotten from that. We announced our new challenge this Monday. It is the Drake equation in honor of Frank Drake's 90th birthday this month. And so the artists are already starting to pull some stuff together. We've already got a couple pieces up. So if you're interested in joining in that, check out the SETI Facebook page, and there will be a link to our group in there.
Fantastic. And if people want to follow more, where do they go?
At SETI Institute on all the things, and at Planetary Pan if you want to follow me. I still post planetary science news when I have a chance.
Perfect. Awesome. So if people are interested, I am going to be having an interview with Moya McTeer, who is, of course, one of the co-hosts on the Weekly Space Hangout. That's going to be on Monday on my YouTube channel. So if you want to see a more in-depth interview with Moya, you should come and join us on Monday. And that's in my, I think I've got that scheduled already. The other thing, and this is, I think you guys are going to all really enjoy this, is we are going to be doing a virtual star party on Sunday night on my YouTube channel as well. I'm going to be running the observatory in Landers, California during the full moon, so it's going to mostly suck. But Corey Schmitz is going to be running his observatory from South Africa, and it's going to be 4 a.m. for him. It's going to be 9 p.m. for me, and he's going to have Saturn, Jupiter, all of the planets, and I'm going to be trying to do some deep sky stuff, so we'll be doing that together. And that's going to be Sunday night on my YouTube channel, and you should be seeing an event there very shortly. So return to the virtual star party. So join us if you can. All right, let me put all of you back on the screen. There we all are. Thank you, everyone, for watching us again here on the Weekly Space Hangout. We really appreciate your support and your fandom. Thanks to all of my co-hosts. Thanks to all the moderators. Thanks to everyone both on Twitch and YouTube. And, of course, our special guest, Pascal Lee. If you want to listen to the show after the fact, you can always get this on as a podcast. So you don't have to join us every week here on YouTube. You can always watch it listen to it afterwards. So again, from everybody here, we will see all of you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And I'm going to press the end stream button. It's going to cut off my sentence right in the middle, and that's just how I roll.